The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched wide like the belly of a sleeping giant. Hundreds of delegates sat in their assigned seats, each one representing a world or a species or an empire that had survived long enough to earn its place among the stars. The air carried the smell of a dozen different atmospheres, filtered and blended so that everyone could breathe without dying. Observer sat in her elevated pod near the western wall, her four eyes scanning the room with the careful attention of someone whose only job was to watch and remember. Today the council was discussing humanity, again. High Arbiter stood at the central platform, his massive frame casting a shadow across the polished floor. He was old even by the standards of his long-lived species, and his voice carried the weight of centuries when he spoke. The question before the council was simple. Should humanity be granted full membership in the galactic community, or should they remain on probation for another 50 cycles? Ambassador rose from his seat before the Arbiter could call for comments. Was a tall and thin with skin like gray stone and eyes that never seemed to blink. He had spent the last 30 years arguing against humanity at every opportunity, and he showed no signs of stopping now. "We cannot trust them," said. His voice echoed through the chamber like wind through a canyon. "They smile and offer friendship, but we do not know what lies beneath those smiles. They are young. They are unpredictable. They have been among us for only 200 years, and in that time they have fought 17 wars." A murmur passed through the assembled delegates. Some nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Watched it all with quiet interest. She had met humans before during a diplomatic mission to there. They had been kind to her. They had offered her food and drink and asked her questions about her people with what seemed like genuine curiosity. But she also knew that kindness could be a mask. Many species wore masks. The Arbiter raised one massive hand to silence the murmuring. "We have heard these arguments before, Ambassador. Do you have anything new to add?" Opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a sharp tone cut through the air. Every delegate turned toward the communications array at the far end of the chamber. A young technician was working frantically at his console, his fingers moving so fast they blurred. "High Arbiter," the technician called out. "We are receiving an emergency broadcast from the contested zone near the border. The signal is coming from a human vessel." Frowned. "What kind of vessel?" "A medical ship, High Arbiter. Registry identifies it as the Starlight Dawn. They are responding to a distress call from a refugee convoy." The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew about the refugee crisis in that sector. 3 species had been displaced by the expansion, their homes burned, their people scattered across a dozen systems with nowhere to go. The Council had debated sending aid for months but had never reached a decision. "Display the broadcast," commanded. The air above the central platform shimmered and then resolved into a 3-dimensional image. Leaned forward in her seat, all 4 eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before her. The bridge of the Starlight Dawn was small and crowded. Humans moved between stations with quick, efficient steps, their faces tight with concentration. At the center stood a woman with short brown hair and tired eyes. She wore a simple uniform with medical insignia on the shoulders, and when she spoke, her voice was calm despite the tension around her. "This is Captain Laura of the humanitarian vessel Starlight Dawn," she said. "We have received a distress call from 12 refugee ships carrying wounded civilians. Estimated casualties exceed 4,000. We are moving to assist." A man at one of the side stations turned toward her. He was young, probably no more than 30 cycles by human reckoning, with the look of someone who had not slept in days. "Captain, long-range sensors are picking up multiple contacts approaching from the border. 7 ships, all military class." Captain did not flinch. "Time to intercept. They will reach the convoy approximately 15 minutes after we do." Another officer spoke up. This one was older with gray at his temples and deep lines around his mouth. Laura, we cannot fight 7 warships. We do not even have weapons. If they catch us there, they will kill us all. I know, Sam. The captain turned to face her crew. Her expression was steady, almost peaceful. I know what we are facing, but there are 4,000 wounded people out there and they have no one else. If we leave, they die, all of them. The older man, the one she had called Sam, nodded slowly. Then we stay. We stay, confirmed. She turned back to the communications officer. Open a channel to the convoy, tell them help is coming, and make sure this broadcast reaches the council. I want them to see what happens next. In the great chamber felt something cold settle in her chest. She did not understand. The humans knew they were going to die. They knew they would show no mercy. And yet they were flying toward death anyway for people who were not even their own species. Ambassador laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. You see, this is what I mean. They are irrational. They throw their lives away for strangers. What kind of species does this? But notice that no one else was laughing. The delegates sat in heavy silence, their eyes fixed on the broadcast as the starlight dawn accelerated toward the refugee convoy, toward whatever waited for them in the dark between stars. High Arbiter lowered himself slowly into his seat. His ancient face was unreadable, but his voice was soft when he spoke. Let them see, he said. Let all the world see. Whatever happens next, it will be witnessed. The broadcast continued, streaming out across hundreds of worlds in real time. Billions of eyes turned toward the small medical ship racing through the void, and on the bridge of the Starlight Dawn, Captain Laura stood with her crew and waited for the storm to arrive. Watched, she did not look away. Something told her that what she was about to witness would change everything she thought she knew about humanity, about mercy, about what it meant to be willing to die for someone you had never met. The darkness of space stretched out before the little ship, and somewhere in that darkness, they were coming. The Starlight Dawn reached the refugee convoy in just under 20 minutes. The broadcast showed everything in sharp detail, the images clear enough that could see the scratches on the hull of the medical ship as it slowed to approach the first of the damaged vessels. 12 ships hung in the void like wounded animals, their hulls scorched and torn, their engines dark. Some of them were leaking atmosphere. Others had stopped transmitting life signs entirely. Captain stood at the center of her bridge, issuing orders in a voice that never wavered. Sam, take your team to the lead ship. Start with the critical cases. Coordinate the triage from here. Keep that broadcast running. I want everyone to see this. Dr. Samuel Grant, the older man with gray at his temples, gathered his medical team near the airlock. He carried a simple bag of supplies over one shoulder, and his face held the expression of someone who had done this work many times before. A young woman stood beside him, her dark hair pulled back, her hands steady as she checked her equipment. This was Cole, the head nurse. She smiled at something one of the other medics said, a small smile that did not quite reach her eyes. They boarded the first refugee ship and began their work. In the council chamber, the delegates watched in silence as the humans moved through the wreckage. The refugees were a mix of 3 species, all of them victims of the expansion. Some were missing limbs. Others had burns that covered most of their bodies. Children cried in the arms of parents who could not comfort them because they were too badly wounded to move. And the humans treated them all. They did not ask which species each patient belonged to. They did not check for documents or authorization. They simply worked, their hands moving with practiced speed, their voices soft and reassuring even when the patients could not understand their words. Ambassador shifted in his seat. This proves nothing, he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Any species would help the wounded if there was no danger. Let us see what they do when they arrive. As if his words had summoned them, the sensor array on the Starlight Dawn began to flash red. Captain, Lieutenant said from his station, 7 warships just dropped out of faster-than-light travel. They are moving to intercept. Contact in 8 minutes. Nodded slowly. She did not look afraid, Understood. Keep the evacuation running. How many have we transferred? 312, Captain. We can fit maybe another 200 before we run out of space. Then we fit another 200. She turned to face the main display, where the approaching warships grew larger with every passing second. Open a channel to the... The screen flickered, and a face appeared. It was not a human face. It was something else entirely, a creature with black eyes and a mouth full of teeth that looked designed for tearing flesh. The commander stared at Captain with the cold hunger of a predator studying its prey. "Human vessel," the commander said. "You are interfering with a military operation. Surrender the refugees and leave this sector, or you will be destroyed." Did not flinch. These people are wounded civilians. They are under the protection of Earth and the humanitarian conventions of the Galactic Council. We will not surrender them. The commander laughed. It was an ugly sound, wet and bubbling. "Protection? You have no weapons. You have no shields worth mentioning. You are one small ship against 7 warships. What protection can you offer?" "The only kind that matters," said. "We will stay between you and them for as long as we can, and the galaxy is watching." In the council chamber, realized she was holding her breath. Around her, she could see other delegates doing the same. Even had fallen silent, his gray stone face frozen in an expression she could not read. The commander cut the transmission, and the warships opened fire. The first blast struck the Starlight Dawn near the stern, ripping through the outer hull and sending a shudder through the entire vessel. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered and died, replaced by the dim red glow of emergency power. On the refugee ship, Dr. Grant felt the impact through the deck plates. He looked up from the patient he was treating, a child with burns covering half its small body, and met Cole's eyes across the crowded medical bay. "Keep working," he said. "We do not stop until we are dead or until everyone is safe." Nodded. She turned back to her own patient, an elderly female who had lost both legs below the knee. Her hands were steady as she applied the bandages, even as the ship shook again from another impact. The broadcast showed everything. It showed the Starlight Dawn taking hit after hit, its small hull buckling under the assault. It showed the medical teams continuing their work even as debris rained down around them. It showed Captain standing at her post, blood running from a cut on her forehead, refusing to leave the bridge. And then it showed Cole. She was carrying a child, one of the alien children from the refugee ship when the ceiling collapsed. There was no time to move, no time to think. She simply turned her body, putting herself between the child and the falling metal, and the debris struck her instead. The child survived. Cole did not. Dr. Grant reached her a moment later. He knelt beside her body, his hands searching for a pulse he already knew he would not find. His face crumpled for just a moment, grief breaking through the professional calm. Then he stood, lifted the child in his arms, and continued toward the airlock. In the council chamber, someone made a sound that might have been a sob. Did not know who. She could not look away from the screen. The humans kept working. They kept dying, and the broadcast continued, sending their sacrifice out across the stars for everyone to see. The broadcast had been running for 47 minutes. Across the galaxy, billions of beings sat in front of their screens, their meals growing cold, their work forgotten. They watched as the Starlight Dawn burned in the cold vacuum of space. They watched as humans died for strangers. Had not moved from her seat in the council chamber. Her 4 eyes ached from staring at the display, but she could not look away. Around her, the other delegates sat in similar stillness. Some had their hands pressed over their mouths. Others wept openly, tears running down faces that had never shown emotion in these halls before. Ambassador had stopped talking. He sat rigid in his chair, his gray stone skin seeming paler than usual, his unblinking eyes fixed on the screen with something that looked almost like horror. On the bridge of the Starlight Dawn, Captain Laura was dying. She did not know it yet, Or perhaps she did and simply refused to acknowledge it. A piece of shrapnel had caught her in the side during the last barrage, and blood soaked through her uniform in a spreading stain. She leaned against her command console for support, one hand pressed against the wound, but her voice remained steady as she issued orders. "What is the status of the evacuation?" Lieutenant looked up from his station. His face was covered in dust and dried blood, and his left arm hung at an angle that suggested it was broken, but his fingers still moved across the controls. "We have transferred 643 refugees to the Starlight Dawn. Another 800 are still on the convoy ships. They are not letting up. Time until they destroy us." Hesitated, 15 minutes, maybe less. Nodded as if he had just given her a weather report. "And the Morning Star?" "Still 20 minutes out. They are pushing their engines as hard as they can, but they will not make it in time." In the council chamber, heard High Arbiter make a sound low in his throat. It might have been a prayer in his ancient language. She did not know. She had never heard him pray before. Captain straightened her spine despite the pain it clearly caused her. "Open a general channel," she said. "I want to send a message to anyone who can hear us." Nodded and pressed a series of buttons. "Channel open, Captain." Looked directly at the camera. Her eyes were tired but clear, and when she spoke, her voice carried across 1,000 worlds. "This is Captain Laura of the humanitarian vessel Starlight Dawn. We are under attack by forces while conducting a rescue operation. Our ship is damaged. Our crew is dying. We will not survive this." She paused and saw her swallow hard before continuing. "But we will not leave. We will not abandon the people we came to save. If any ships can reach this location, please continue our work. Get these people to safety. That is all we ask. Not rescue for ourselves. Just finish what we started." She lowered her head for a moment, and when she raised it again, there were tears on her cheeks. "To my crew, I am proud of every single one of you. To my family back on Earth, I love you. Tell my daughter that her mother died doing what was right." She cut the transmission and turned back to her work. On the refugee ships, Dr. Samuel Grant continued to move between patients. He had lost count of how many he had treated. His hands were stained with blood in 6 different colors, the blood of 6 different species, and his medical bag was nearly empty. Behind him, the sounds of battle echoed through the damaged hulls. He reached a patient he could not save. A young male, barely more than a child by the standards of his species, with wounds too severe for the limited supplies Grant carried. The doctor tried anyway, working with desperate speed, but the patient's eyes went dark before he could finish. Grant sat back on his heels and pressed his bloody hands against his face. His shoulders shook once, twice, and then he was weeping, great silent sobs that racked his entire body. In the council chamber, watched him cry. She watched him grieve for a stranger, for someone he had never met before today, for someone whose name he probably did not even know. And then she watched him wipe his eyes, stand up, and move to the next patient. High Arbiter spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have lived for 800 years. I have seen wars and plagues and the rise and fall of empires, but I have never seen anything like this." Did not respond. His eyes had not left the screen. On the Starlight Dawn, another blast struck the engineering section. The lights flickered and died completely this time, leaving only the faint glow of portable emergency lamps. Someone screamed in the darkness, a high, thin sound that cut off abruptly. Captain grabbed a lamp and moved toward the sound. She found 2 of her crew trapped beneath a fallen beam, their legs crushed, their faces pale with shock. She could not lift the beam alone. She called for help, and 3 refugees came running, beings from species that had fought wars against humanity in the past, beings who had every reason to hate her kind. They helped anyway. They lifted the beam while pulled her crew to safety. One of the refugees, an elderly female with 6 arms and gentle eyes, looked at with something like wonder. "Why do you do this?" the refugee asked. "You are dying for us, we are nothing to you." Managed a small smile despite the blood on her face and the pain in her side. "You are not nothing, you are people, that is enough." The elderly refugee stared at her for a long moment. Then she bowed her head in a gesture of respect that recognized from her studies of that species. It was the bow they reserved for their greatest heroes. The broadcast continued. The galaxy watched, and somewhere in the darkness of space, the morning star raced toward them, still too far away to help. The Starlight Dawn had stopped moving. Her engines were gone, torn apart by weapons fire, and she drifted in the void like a broken bird. Smoke poured from a dozen wounds in her hull. Emergency bulkheads held back the vacuum in some sections, but others had been lost entirely, their atmosphere bleeding out into the endless dark. On the bridge, Captain Laura sat in her command chair because she could no longer stand. The wound in her side had gotten worse. She could feel herself growing weaker with every passing minute, her thoughts becoming slow and heavy. But she refused to close her eyes. She refused to stop watching. Lieutenant worked at his station with his one good arm, keeping the broadcast running through sheer determination. The communications array was damaged, the signal cutting in and out, but he found ways to patch it together with emergency power and pieces of equipment salvaged from other parts of the ship. "Captain," he said, "the Morning Star is still 12 minutes out." Looked at the tactical display. The warships had stopped firing for the moment, circling the wounded convoy like sharks waiting for the right moment to strike. She understood why. They wanted to make a show of the final kill. They wanted the galaxy to see humanity fall. "How many did we save?" He checked his readings. 819 refugees are aboard the Starlight Dawn. Another 500 are still on the convoy ships. "And our crew?" Was quiet for a moment. 14 dead, 23 wounded. Most of the wounded are still working. Nodded slowly. 14 dead. 14 people who had woken up that morning expecting another ordinary day, who had families waiting for them back home, who had dreams and hopes and plans for the future. Gone now, all of them, because they had refused to abandon strangers in need. On the refugee ships, Dr. Samuel Grant was performing surgery by the light of a portable lamp. The medical bay had lost power hours ago, but he kept working, his hands steady despite the exhaustion that made his vision blur at the edges. Beside him, 2 of the refugees he had saved earlier held the patient still while he worked. They did not speak the same language, but they understood what needed to be done. The surgery was delicate. The patient was a child, barely old enough to walk, with internal injuries that would kill her within the hour if he could not repair the damage. Grant had performed this procedure 100 times before, but never in conditions like this. Never with explosions shaking the deck beneath his feet and the certainty of death hanging over his head. He finished the last suture and stepped back. The child's vital signs stabilized, her small chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Grant let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "She will live," he said to no one in particular. On the bridge of the lead warship, the commander watched the broadcast with contempt curling his lips. These humans were pathetic, he thought. They could have saved themselves. They could have run when they had the chance. Instead, they chose to die for creatures that were not even their own kind. He opened a channel to the Starlight Dawn. "Human captain, your ship is crippled. Your crew is dead or dying. This farce has gone on long enough." His face appeared on his screen. She looked like death itself, pale and bloodied, but her eyes still held a spark of defiance that made the commander's teeth grind together. "We are still here," she said. "We are still protecting them." "You are protecting nothing. In 5 minutes, I will order my ships to destroy your vessel and the entire convoy. Every single being you tried to save will die, and your sacrifice will mean nothing." Smiled. It was a strange expression, almost peaceful, and it made the commander uneasy in ways he did not want to examine. "You do not understand," she said. You have never understood. Mercy is not about winning. It is not about calculation or strategy or making sure your sacrifice means something in the end. It is about choosing to care for someone who needs help, even when it costs you everything, even when you know you might fail. She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something almost gentle. You can kill us. You can kill every person on these ships, but you cannot kill the choice we made. You cannot kill the fact that we stood between you and them for as long as we could. That choice will live forever in the minds of everyone who witnessed it today. The commander snarled and cut the transmission. Prepare to fire, he ordered. Destroy them all. In the council chamber felt her heart's racing. She wanted to look away but could not. Around her, delegates gripped the arms of their seats, their bodies tense with helpless anger. High Arbiter had risen to his feet. His ancient hands were clenched into fists at his sides. There must be something we can do, he said. We cannot just watch them die. But there was nothing. The council was too far away. Their ships could never reach the convoy in time. All they could do was witness. On the starlight dawn, the crew gathered on the bridge. Those who could walk helped those who could not. They stood together in the dim emergency lighting, humans and refugees side by side, and waited for the end. Captain looked at them, at the brave and terrified faces of her crew, at the refugees who had become part of their family in these final hours. She opened her mouth to speak, to offer some final words of comfort or courage. And then the sensors screamed with new contacts. Lieutenant stared at his console in disbelief. Captain, the Morning Star has arrived. She is coming in at attack speed. The rescue cruiser burst out of faster-than-light travel like a avenging angel, her weapons already firing, her shields blazing with reflected energy. Behind her came 2 more ships, then 3, then 5, all of them racing to join the fight. The distress call had reached more ears than anyone had expected. They hesitated. 7 warships against 1 crippled medical vessel was easy. 7 warships against a growing fleet of angry ships from a dozen different species was something else entirely. The commander made his choice. His fleet turned and fled into the darkness. On the bridge of the starlight dawn, someone started crying. Someone else started laughing. Captain looked at the screen, at the ships that had come to save them, and felt the last of her strength leave her body. She slid from her chair to the deck, and the world went dark around her. The broadcast ended with the image of rescue ships surrounding the starlight dawn like protective guardians. Medical teams from a dozen species boarded the damaged vessel, carrying stretchers and supplies, working alongside the exhausted human crew to save everyone they could. The screen flickered once, twice, and then went dark. The council chamber was silent. Did not move. She sat in her elevated pod and stared at the empty display, her 4 eyes burning with tears she had not realized she was shedding. Around her, the other delegates remained frozen in their seats, as if they had forgotten how to move, as if the weight of what they had witnessed had pinned them in place. High Arbiter stood at the central platform, his massive frame seeming somehow smaller than it had been at the start of the session. His ancient face was wet. He made no attempt to hide it. For several long minutes, no one spoke. The silence stretched out like a living thing, filling every corner of the great chamber with its presence. Finally, found her voice. I have studied humanity for 30 years, she said. The words came out rough and uneven, but she forced herself to continue. I have read their histories. I have analyzed their conflicts. I have their achievements and their failures. And in all that time, I thought I understood them. She stood up from her seat, her legs unsteady beneath her. I was wrong. What we witness today cannot be explained by logic. It cannot be measured by the calculations we use to predict the behavior of other species. Those humans knew they were going to die. They knew they would show no mercy. And they stayed anyway for people who were strangers to them, for people who had once been enemies. She turned to face Ambassador, who still sat motionless in his chair. Tell me, Ambassador, what species does this? What species throws away their lives for beings they have never met? Did not answer. His gray stone face was cracked with emotion, lines appearing where none had existed before. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I have spent 30 years arguing against humanity. I have called them dangerous, unpredictable, untrustworthy. He paused, and something shifted in his unblinking eyes. I was wrong about all of it. High Arbiter raised his hand for attention. The gesture was unnecessary. Every delegate was already watching him. Today we gathered to debate whether humanity deserved full membership in our community, he said. His voice echoed through the chamber with the weight of centuries. We plan to argue about their past wars, their political instability, their rapid technological advancement. We plan to discuss whether they could be trusted with the responsibilities that come with membership. He gestured toward the dark display. Instead, we witnessed something else entirely. We watched human beings choose death rather than abandon innocent lives. We watched them weep for patients they could not save, and then return to their work without hesitation. We watched a captain stand on her burning bridge and speak of mercy as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. He turned slowly, his eyes passing over every delegate in the chamber. The commander told Captain that human mercy would die today. He was wrong. Mercy cannot be killed because it is not a thing that exists in the world. It is a choice humans make again and again, knowing the cost, accepting the pain, refusing to let fear or self-interest win. The arbiter moved to the voting console at the center of the platform. I call for an immediate vote on humanity's membership status. All those in favor of granting full membership, indicate now. Lights began to appear across the chamber. One by one, delegates pressed their voting controls, and one by one, green lights flickered to life. The process took less than a minute. When it was finished, every single light in the chamber was green. Unanimous, said softly. For the first time in 300 years, we have reached a unanimous decision. The doors to the chamber opened, and Commander Daniel West walked in. He was a tall man with kind eyes and silver in his hair, the Earth Fleet representative assigned to the Council. He had been watching the broadcast from an observation room, and his face still carried the marks of tears. Commander West said, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I am honored to inform you that humanity has been granted full membership in our community. This decision was unanimous. West stood very still for a moment. Then he bowed his head. Thank you, High Arbiter, but I need you to understand something. My people did not do this for membership. They did not do it for recognition or reward. They did it because there were people who needed help and they were able to give it. We know, said. That is why the vote was unanimous. In her seat, watched the ceremony unfold with a strange mixture of grief and hope. She thought about Cole, who had died shielding an alien child with her body. She thought about Dr. Samuel Grant, weeping over a patient he could not save, and then moving on to the next one. She thought about Captain Laura, standing on her burning bridge and speaking of mercy as if it were more important than survival itself. Later, after the session ended, after the delegates had returned to their homes and their worlds, sat alone in the empty chamber and wrote her report. She was an observer. It was her job to watch and remember, to record the events of the galaxy for future generations. She wrote about the battle and the rescue. She wrote about the votes and the speeches. But at the end, she added something that was not strictly part of her duties. Today they tried to teach the galaxy that compassion is weakness, she wrote. They tried to show us that mercy has no place among the stars, that only the strong survive, that kindness is something to be exploited rather than honored. They failed. Because today, humans taught us something different. They taught us that true strength is not found in power over others. It is found in the willingness to suffer for them, to die for them, to love them without asking for anything in return. The commander said that human mercy died in real time. He was wrong. Human mercy lived in real time, and the council witnessed it. We witnessed it, and we were changed by what we saw. She saved the report and sent it out across the stars. Then she stood, walked to the great windows that lined the western wall, and looked out at the endless darkness of space. Somewhere out there, the Starlight Dawn was being repaired. Somewhere out there, Captain was recovering from her wounds, surrounded by the crew who had survived alongside her. Somewhere out there, 800 refugees were beginning new lives on worlds that had opened their doors to receive them. Mercy had not died today. It had lived, and in living it had changed everything. Smiled and turned away from the window. She had more work to do. They all did. But for the first time in a very long time, she felt like that work might actually matter.